And therefore, we find that where the Catholic Church is, it's going to inundate the whole of life. This is going to happen. That's why G.K. Chesterton says, you can tell a Catholic by the way he climbs a tree. There's a Catholic way of climbing a tree, and there's a Protestant way of climbing a tree. It just comes out. We act different when we're Catholic. And for instance, you roll out of bed, you get on your knees, you say your morning offering, then you get up and start cursing everybody. And the fact is that there's a Catholic way to sin, there's a Catholic way to do good. There's just something, the Catholicity is in the blood, and it somehow spreads. And so that the oneness cannot stay in the mind. It cannot stay in the sacraments. It cannot stay in the church. It cannot stay in the sacrifice. It can't stay in obedience to the Pope. It spreads into the holiness, which is the person's, not just obedience, but the holy person, and the holy places, and the holy things, and the holy times. But then it then must become Catholic. These things must be Catholic. We find that whenever you are in a church that belongs to God, that church desires to be everywhere. Catholicity is essential to the Catholic, to the church founded by God. In fact, it's the most obvious element, and that's why we call our church the Roman Catholic Church. It's the Catholic Church, because it's the church which wants God in everything. It's a church that wants God in your marriage, wants God in your children, wants God in your clothing, wants God in your business, wants God in your country, wants God in every element of your society. That's what our church is about. It's a universal takeover. The church is going to be a Catholic. It's going to be everywhere, wherever that church is, it's going to be Catholic. And then, of course, apostolic, which flows from it. It's an obvious effect. Apostolic means it comes from God, goes back to the apostles. That's one half of it. But the other part is the church spreads. The church does not want to remain for the elect. It does not want to remain inside of the priest or inside of the Catholic faithful. It wants to spread to the whole world. There's something, because God wants all things to himself. God has made, I am a selfish God. God is apostolic. God has made all things for himself. So that same thing. God has made all things for himself. He wants to bring all things to himself. All things, apostolic. For himself, holy. And so this church must spread. Now, when the devil is trying to destroy the Catholic Church, and we have a Catholic society, he has to go in stages. Since what we're after is to kill the unity of the faith. But you can't go directly to the faith, because you can look at holiness, Catholicity, and apostolicity as like walls around oneness. If you try to attack the oneness directly, it won't work. You won't be able to get to it. So you've got to first tear down the outer wall of apostolicity, then you tear down Catholicity, then you tear down holiness, and now you're free to destroy the faith. That's what's been happening down the last 500 years. For instance, previous to the Protestant Revolution, 500 years ago, every Catholic knew that you had to spread the faith. And everybody needed to be Catholic. Everybody in Europe was Catholic. Everybody knew that wherever the Catholic went, he had to spread the faith. This was in the heart of the Portuguese and in the heart of the Spanish. When they got on their ships, and they went to India, and they went to Africa, and they went to the Philippines, and they went all over the world, what do? They carried the cross, and they carried the crown. They didn't just carry the crown, and they didn't just want gold. They knew that wherever they went, if they discovered a new land, this land must be for Christ, which is why when Christopher Columbus landed on the first island that he saw in the New World, they called it San Salvador. First thing he did was plant the cross. And this was the practice of the Spanish and the Portuguese, wherever they went. They knew the church is by nature essentially apostolic, and they lived for that apostolic. But what happened? In the 1500s, in the 16th century, the Protestantism, and the Lutherans, and the religious wars. And the religious wars, the Catholics and Protestants are killing each other. So what happens? Let's stop killing each other. You accept to live in your little Protestant church, which is stolen from the Catholics, and we'll accept to live in our Catholic church, and you'll be on 4th Street, and we'll be on 3rd Street, and we'll live in peace. We won't bother you, you won't bother us. Apostolicity begins to die. They still keep their Catholic faith. But the apostolic begins to die. Then the Catholic begins to go. Because you know that Protestants, they believe you've got a faith alone, right? Faith alone. You don't need the places, the things, the times. You just need faith alone. You don't need the life of virtue. You don't need to make the religion all of your life. You have to live a natural life in society, and then you go to church on Sunday and you praise the Lord, and you go and sin on Monday. And then the Lord forgives you because you've got the faith. Remember, Martin Luther said, sin boldly, believe more boldly. So the belief makes up for the sin. Sin boldly, but believe more boldly. So the Catholicity begins to diminish. Because we believe in the faith, but we don't need the faith to be in business. Because we're making business with Protestants. So it might be, like for instance they do in St. Mary's, Kansas, St. Mary's Marble, for instance, in St. Mary's, Kansas, at the Catholic marble shop, they have 150 employees, and at noon, the bell, everybody stops, the bell rings, and they say the Angelus. And the priest comes in and blesses the place every year at the Easter time. And they say prayer at the beginning of the workday. They say prayer at the end of the workday. The Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be. And they say Catholic prayers. Now, once you have Catholics and Protestants together, now the Protestants are going to kill the Catholics. The Catholics are going to kill the Protestants. So let's take prayer out of the workplace. Let's take the blessings out of the workplace. The Catholicity, which is that the Catholic faith and the Catholic practice must be everywhere where we are, begins to diminish. The next stage, holiness goes away. Church is the place where to be holy, and we don't need to be holy outside the church. And the spiritual begins to be diminished and diminished and diminished. So that the men no longer go to church. Only the women go to church. And the holiness goes away and goes away and goes away. And the visibility of the faith diminishes and diminishes and diminishes until finally we come along with the 20th century and the 19th century with the Protestantism, with the evolution, the 20th century with modernism, the outgrowth of this evolution, and then we no longer need the Catholic faith to go to heaven. Vatican II rips apart the unity. Vatican II destroys the unity. Now, the same steps can be found in the history of the society as they rise today. You go back before 1994. Before 94, we're spreading all over the world. And we are in so many countries, priests everywhere, going to say the Mass, answering the calls of the faithful. And there was a big outcry. At the time, it seemed very reasonable. I remember I was ordained that year, and I remember that, you see, in the days of Father Schmidberger, we used to make fun of Father Schmidberger all the time. We are in Sri Lanka, and there are the priest is in Sri Lanka, and there are 3 faithfuls, and the 2 faithfuls traveled with the priest, and the other faithfuls that was in Sri Lanka couldn't make it for the Mass, but the church, the society now has a place in Sri Lanka. And then we have another place here where there are 2 faithfuls, and there's another place there where there's 5 faithfuls, and so they have this, we're on a map, we can say we're in Sri Lanka, and we are in India, and we are in all these countries. But when you see the number of faithfuls, it's not very many. And they say, look, the priest is flying all over the planet. He gets out of the plane, he goes in the car, he goes to the chapel, he says Mass, and there's 6 faithful. 4 of which we're not even sure if they believe in God. And they come to Mass, and then they go home, and they're not living the faith. What are we doing? And then the priest burns out, and so many priests leave the priesthood. So many priests leave the apostolate. So many priests go crazy. And so they're all overworked and blah, blah, they disappear, etc. So we need to create a stable priesthood in the society. And so the apostolic goes away. It went in stages. At first it sounded very good. It's true the priest can run too ragged. It's true you have to have a certain balance between your external apostolate and the internal. But what had happened? It created a new spirit in the society, and now we've got almost 20 years later, and priests refuse to say more than 1 Mass on a Sunday. It's gone to the other extreme. You go to some chapels, and here's the priest on the main altar saying Mass, and then there's a priest saying Mass on the side altar, and they go to breakfast afterwards, And meanwhile, there's 5, 10, 15, 20 chapels where they don't have Mass. Maybe 5 Masses on a Sunday like they used to do in America. Archbishop Lefebvre said that's too many. We're reduced to only 3. But in America, they used to do 5 Masses on a Sunday. And Father Bazat used to say the first Mass in El Paso, Texas. He would say the second Mass in El Paso, Texas, the second Mass. Then he would get on a plane, and he would fly 600, 800 kilometers away to Albuquerque, Mexico. Then he would say the third Mass. Then he would get on a plane, and he would fly another 800 kilometers to Denver, Colorado. Then he would say the fourth Mass. And then he would drive an hour and a half, hour north to Fort Collins and say the fifth Mass. Every single Sunday. Father Bolduc used to say Mass. His first Mass would be in St. Mary's, Kansas, and then he had a pilot who would fly him around in a private plane, a little crop duster, a Cessna 172. So then he would fly to Wichita and say the second Mass. Then he would fly to St. Louis and say the third Mass. And then Kansas City and say the third Mass. Then he would fly to St. Louis and say the fourth Mass. Then he would drive to Mexico, Missouri and say the fifth Mass. Then he would fly back to St. Mary's on Monday morning, every week. So they say, well, that's too much. It's excessive. And it probably was. So from excessive, we go back to zilch. When I was ordained a priest, for instance, in 94, the apostolic, we had 27 priests in the United States, and we had 105 chapels and 25 schools. Now, in 2013, we have in the United States 84 priests instead of 27. From 27 went to 84. We have 103 chapels instead of 105. And we have 22 schools. 20 years have almost passed. And you see that the apostolic is somehow diminished. But we still have newspapers that say opening new school, opening new chapel, building new church. So it looks like we're alive and vibrant. But yet it doesn't tell you about the ones that closed or the ones that cut back. For used to have Mass every Sunday or twice a month. And now it's once a month and once every 2 months. Our 4 chapels in Alaska are now down to 1 chapel in Alaska, or now 2 chapels in Alaska, and so on. So many of these things happening throughout. 4 chapels in Hawaii, now 1 chapel in Hawaii, and so on and so on and so on. So that all these things slowly diminishing. But no one notices the apostolic. And with its apostolic spirit diminishing, why is it so important to attack the apostolic? Because the apostolic is charity. It's charity. Also, St. Thomas tells us, the apostolic is charity, but it's also wisdom. He says wisdom is related to charity. He says that the wisdom always produces charity. Why is this? Wisdom is to make this is supernatural prudence is what it is. Well, one is the purpose of every decision we make as human beings. Every decision we make as human beings is in order to get to our end, which is heaven. The wise man always has a view to the end, which means he has a view to God. Wisdom is the virtue that looks directly at God as our end. It looks directly at God. And then we see that all the things we do need to be guided towards God. Now, what happens when we get more and more filled with God? St. Thomas says, the most wise man is the most apostolic man. He says the perfection of wisdom is apostolicity. He says the most wise man is the most active man. Why is this? Because no one is more wise than the Word made flesh. And when God the Son became man, what did He do? He spent His life in dragging souls to heaven. He was filled with an apostolic desire. For instance, St. Thomas says why wisdom always creates apostolicity in its perfection. He says, when you are thinking only of God, when you love only God, this means you will love the things that God has created. And when you look at the things that God has created, you will see that He created a beautiful wall, but the wall is dirty. And out of the love of God, you want to remove the dirt. Now, the only dirt that offends God is sin. And the only sin that exists is in the free will of men. And therefore, the man of wisdom is filled with a burning desire to remove sin from the world, which is found only in the hearts of sinners. And that is why the most wise, the most immersed in God, is the most apostolic. Who is the patroness of the missions? St. Teresa of the Child Jesus. She had apostolicity inside of her heart. The apostolic was so much in her, and she never left her monastery, her convent, her Carmel. But her apostolicity was essential to her. So you can see apostolicity could be like the nervous system. If you have the feelings in your nervous system, when you get cancer, or rather when you have diabetes, or when you get leprosy, you know, you can kick a chair. I used to say Mass for about 150 lepers in India. And visiting lepers, the doctor was explaining to me about the leper. He said, the trouble with a leper is that he has no pain. And the doctor was explaining to me, you don't realize how beneficial pain is for your health. As an example, a leper walks outside. He can't feel his feet. He twists his ankle. He doesn't feel pain. So he keeps walking on that ankle really hard. Then he breaks his ankle. And he keeps walking on it. Then he breaks every bone in his foot. But he doesn't feel any pain. So he keeps walking on it. Next thing you know, he cuts off the circulation. His foot decays. What's the problem? He feels no pain. And he says they break their own hands. They break their own fingers because they can't feel. He says they'll pick up a cup. A leper will pick up a cup and he'll drop it. So what do? You hold it really tight. He doesn't know he's holding it really tight. He doesn't know that he's cutting off his own circulation. He doesn't know he's damaging his own muscles. He's holding it as tight as a human being can hold it, but he doesn't know that because he can't feel. We begin to lose our feeling when we lose this apostolic spirit. It's the charity of the church spreading out. The apostolicity began to be lost when Bishop Fellay became superior in 1994. I remember when he became the superior, we were very happy. At first I was shocked that he became a superior because Archbishop Lefebvre said that there shouldn't be a bishop that's a superior because it will give a false impression. A bishop can be a superior, that's no problem. There's no canonical problem with a bishop being a superior. It's just because of our crisis in the church that since we know we need bishops and we no longer see our local bishop as he really is, there is a danger that if a bishop becomes a superior, we will begin to think of that bishop as our bishop. It's a danger. Well, it turns out that's what happened. That's what happened. We think of Bishop Fellay not as an elected superior general in charge of making sure the statutes of the society are fulfilled and started making assignments where priests are assigned and having certain administrative duties. He's just the CEO of a company, basically. What's the big deal? But because he's bishop, we begin to think of him as the teacher of our truth, the one who has jurisdiction over us, the one that gives us a right to hear confessions, the one that gives us right to do marriages, and this is gravely wrong, and we all know it's wrong. But the trouble with it is we have the temptation of thinking like that because we know we need bishops. So at first I was shocked that he became a superior general, but wasn't worried about it too much, and I was happy with the fact that Bishop Fellay was a superior general after a while. In that short period of time, he was just kind of surprised, that's all, because of that danger. But I remember from the very beginning, now that Bishop Fellay is superior, he's going to be nicer to the priests. We're not going to be having so much apostolic activity like we did before. We're still going to be apostolic, but there's going to be a toning down because he's Swiss and he moves slowly anyway. You know, and Father Chazelle said he was talking to a Swiss man, and he says the particular canton where Bishop Fellay is from, he said, you know what, all Swiss are known as slow. But then the canton in which Bishop Fellay is, known by the Swiss as being too slow for the Swiss. And within the canton in which Bishop Fellay is, Econ is known as the ones that are too slow for the people that are too slow inside of the canton, which is too slow for the Swiss, which are too slow for the rest of the world. And so that's what he said. He says, he's not in any hurry, and it moves so slowly, so slowly. And so he said, we're going to calm down the SSPX. We're going to continue to say Masses, but we're going to focus on the priests. And it sounded very good. But what happened over time is the focus on the priests became selfishness. What are we building right now? Beautiful rectories. We're building beautiful rectories. We're building beautiful $50 million seminaries. But we don't have money for a church in St. Mary's, Kansas. Those people are too poor. And we don't have money. If we got $80 million to build a seminary, why don't we build a church for the people in St. Mary's, Kansas? In the old days, we would be building churches and churches and churches. Now we're having nice rectories. It became really clear to me. We were landing in Denver, and Denver is a church. I used to have a church, I'd built a church in Denver, a big, beautiful church. And when you're landing in the airplane, you could see all the houses, and then St. Isidore's, because it's right next to the airport. And so you're looking out the window, and a couple times ago, I was landing there, flying in. I looked out the window, and you see junkie house, junkie house, junkie house, junkie house, beautiful castle. That's the Priory. And then junkie house, junkie house, junkie house, and the church. It wasn't even planned that way. It's just what happened. Because that was donated to us. So it wasn't even really planned that way. It just kind of worked out that way. And then, so we have all these beautiful rectories and these magnificent houses for the priests. And the seminary is going to be there for a beautiful place where 80 million euro seminary that's going to be built, a $50 million seminary, $60 million seminary that's going to be built in order to have a beautiful place for the young men that are priests. And so it started off as balance. It ended up with evil clericalism, the apostolicity going down. That was phase 1. Phase 2, Catholic. Catholic. What do we mean when we say the church is Catholic? The Catholic Church wants to be in everything. It's got to be everywhere. Catholic workplace. Now what happens? The new Society of St. Pius X, we see a diminishing of a Catholicity. What does this mean? Avoid politics. The new society, the new SSPX. Avoid politics. Don't mix religion and politics. For instance, Holocaust denying is the most grave of all possible sins. And we've got to keep with a religious teaching, but not become too political. Avoid politics. Avoid no end of the world stuff. No talk of conspiracy. That's the negative side. No talk of conspiracy, no end of the world stuff, avoid politics. This is all taking away Catholicity. That's the negative side. What about the positive side? Don't speak too much of the social reign of Jesus Christ. Don't have an unrealistic view. Father Pfluger said it. Don't have an unrealistic view of the social reign of Christ. Yeah, we want Christ to reign, but it's just not realistic. Look at the world around you. We've got to adapt to the world around us. So, don't have an unrealistic view. Don't overemphasize. No overemphasis. On social kingship. Christ the King. He still teaches the King. No social relationship with Christ the King. I only write on the board because it makes me feel good. No one can read it, but that's because you can't read it. So no overemphasis on Christ the King, or on modesty, for instance. Throw out TV, no TV. All these things we used to talk about all the time. You know, remember the priest would take out the TV and they would shoot a hole in it, and then we say throw out your TV, ladies wear dresses, and now we say be balanced. I heard a priest told one of our faithful, I would say the name, but I don't want to say the name, but a French priest told one of our faithful in the United States. He says, you people in America, the SSPX, traditional people, you're too strict on this dress thing. We're very strict. We tell you wear dresses all the time, every day, all day, and so on. Right? No pants, etc. And so he says, you're too strict on this kind of thing. He says, you know what? A girl who wears a dress and goes in the inner city is asking to be assaulted. She should be wearing her jeans. That's an SSPX priest speaking. Now, it started with, let's not overemphasize these things. Let's not talk too much about these things. And besides, you can be a Catholic and still have a TV. You can be a Catholic and still have imperfections and modesty of dress. And the social kingship of Christ, of course we believe in it. But, this isn't the time. These people are worshiping Satan, let's not overemphasize it. If you look at the book here, pulled out the little book of Father Tam. There used to be many of these books. We have a bit of chaos here. There's many of these books. Oh, where is it? It's the, anyway, it's on the, basically, restoring all things in prayer. Notes on the Revolution of the Church, written in 1986. This is the old SSPX. We were apostolic, Catholic. One of the effects of Catholicity in our own heart is we want world domination. We want the whole world to be a follower of Christ. And when we come to the city of Denver, or we come to the city of Sydney, and we got Mass in this house, we got a battle plan. We're going to conquer the whole city. We're going to bring every single person into the Catholic faith. And we're going to fight the modernists and the Masons and the Jews and all the bad guys. We're going to fight them all. And that's the spirit of this book. Notes the Revolution of the Church. You see a classic picture of the old SSPX days. There's St. Peter's with a left hand, a red hand, with a hammer and signal of the communists crashing the middle of St. Peter's Square, and Martin Luther and Lenin and all the bad guys, with a Lady of La Salette weeping in the background. This is very clear that this is a warrior document. And what does it talk about? 6 conditions. It's really hilarious, chapter 10. My house burnt down on February the 24th in Kentucky. This was saved from the fire, so we pulled it out of the fire, and you see the little burn marks here. This is a copy of the burn marks. This is preserved from the fire. This is a book from the old days we've forgotten about. We used to use these kind of books all the time. But it's interesting that in 1986, Father Tam speaks of 6 conditions. Not 6 conditions for us to be approved by Rome. 6 conditions for us to get a little bitty piece of paper. That's the new pusillanimous, wimpy society of St. Pius X. Back in 86, we had few priests, maybe 250 priests. We had small chapels and houses all over the world. And we were talking about 6 conditions for restoring Christendom. 6 conditions for restoring the whole of the Catholic society. Personal reform, number 1. Benefit from the lessons of the past, number 2. Return to sincerity of language. Flee equivocal words. Avoid seductive expressions. Tell the truth of each thing. Clarity of language, no more in SSPX. Return to theological truth of the existence of original sin. Number 4. Number 5. Return to economic truth. Bring Catholic faith back into economics. Get rid of usury. Get rid of the wicked economic practices. And then number 6. Return to social truth. Bring back Christ into the courts. Bring him back into the public square. Bring him back to everything. That's the old SSPX. Catholic and apostolic. We haven't denied any of these things, officially anyway, until recently. We're just not fighting it anymore. The apostolicity goes away. Let's be balanced. Let's not overextend ourselves. Let's not overwork the priests. Sounds good. But what about the call of the faithful? We used to wake up at 2 in the morning and go and answer sick calls. Now you can't. Now you get the answering machine. And so, what's happened? And then the Catholicity. We want the Catholic faith in every place, in every home, in every part of the home. We want to make sure you got holy pictures. We want to make sure you've got the holy dress. We want to make sure that you're trying to convert the people in the workplace. We talk about the conspiracy. I remember, like Dr. Huynowski was saying, we used to have parish picnics. We still have parish picnics. When you go to the parish picnic in the 1990s, what part of the conspiracy are you following? Yeah, what about the Bilderbergers? Did you hear about what the Masons are doing? That president's great. Well, we're going to go and conquer. They would talk about the Bilderbergers, the Masons, the conspiracy. We need to conquer the bad guys. We've got to go and rebuild the church for Christ. That's parish picnic. Now they talk about, the football scores. And they talk about, being balanced and not being extreme, I'm normal. We have talks about normal. the people got to be normal. I think some of these Catholics, some of these Christian Catholics are too extreme. They're so extreme. They're always worried about a conspiracy, and they're always worried about they see a mason behind every tree, and they're too weird. I mean, look at the way they dress. They got bonnets on their head, and they got dresses that go down below their toenails, and it's just getting ridiculous. And I believe in balance. What does balance mean? It means a one-piece suit instead of a bikini. That's balance. It means that you wear modest skin-tight jeans instead of immodest skin-tight jeans. And it means that you beat your husband up once a week rather than every day. And so the fact is that it means you're very faithful to your second wife and your second husband, and so on and so forth. So what's all made? Our language is becoming more like unto the world, and the Catholicity was beginning to diminish. The next stage, holiness. Holiness. What matters is that we start changing the liturgy. Start changing what we're doing in the liturgy. We can't be over too much focus on devotions. We has to be a balance. The perpetual help devotion and the rosary crusades, the processions and all that. We diminish the processions we used to do. We diminish the holy practices that we used to do. And we do them much less and less, diminishing the number of times for confession. We still have confession, but we have less and less confessions. We're diminishing the number of masses. We used to say 2 masses, but now we realize that you can fit everybody. Like St. Isidore's, for instance, it's a big church. We used to have 2 masses every Sunday. But they said, you know what, it's a big church. We can fit everybody in 1 mass, so why don't we just reduce to 1 mass? Because the priest is tired. Realize when you reduce to 1 mass, even if the church is big, you're killing the parish life. You are diminishing the number of people that can make it to mass. You're increasing the number of people that don't make it to mass, because some people can't go to the 10 o'clock mass all the time, so they'll go to the 8 o'clock or the 7:30 mass. And then you're diminishing the growth of your parish. Even it doesn't matter that the building is bigger, so the holiness begins to go down. We don't need all these supernatural things that we used to have. We still have them, less and less and less. And the people are beginning to notice it. Father, can you go and anoint somebody? No. Is he a parishioner? Is he a parishioner? I had to fly from Brazil back to New York and anoint a priest who was dying. The priest is better now. He's still alive, but now he's dying again. He's 84, 85 years old. Because the local society priests, who were, admittedly, it was a 3-hour drive from them, but for me coming from Brazil, it was a longer trip. And, so they would not go and anoint him because, he's 84 years old. He was ordained when he was 72, and, maybe it wasn't a valid ordination. He was ordained by a state of conscience. Maybe it was valid. Well, does that mean he cannot be absolved of his sins? Does that mean he's not able to be anointed? Does that mean he is incapable of salvation? Look at the confusion in our times. He's a good priest. Does he have to be refused the sacraments? Do you have to get special permission? He said, I got to get special permission. Other cases of priests refusing to go to the faithful. He's not a parishioner. One time in California, a person was dying, which was very bad of him because he was dying on vacation. He should have scheduled his death better. But the fact is, he was a traditional Catholic from the beginning, from 1970. But he was in the Cincinnati, Ohio, Kentucky area, not too far from my home. He was visiting his daughter in California and foolishly decided to almost die when he was in California. He should have thought ahead. He shouldn't have done that. But unfortunately, he didn't plan ahead. So he got sick and almost died in California. So they called the priest, an SSPX priest in California, can you please anoint this? He's not a parishioner. Finally, my brother calls to look, Father. My mommy calls to look. He's been a Society of St. Pius X parishioner for 40 years. But he doesn't go to California every week for Mass because it's a really long trip. He lives in Kentucky. It's closer for him to go to the Mass that's been there for the last 30 years than it is to travel 2,000 miles to be one of your parishioners. But he's dying right now. And he's a Catholic. And not only is he a Catholic, he's a traditional Catholic. My brother was going to fly from Kentucky. He was on vacation at the time. He was going to fly 3,000 miles to anoint the man. And finally, the priest agreed to go and anoint him. But it was a battle. These are the diminishings of the holiness. You know, in the 1980s, there were many Catholics came to the Latin Mass simply because they called every church at 2 in the morning because Grandma was dying. And then they called, St. Bimbob's Church, the local SSPX church. And they called it, and the priest answered the phone at 2 in the morning and said, Father, my grandma is dying. Can you anoint him at the St. Mary and Elizabeth Hospital? Boom, he goes and anoints. And they come in, they see the priest in the cassock. What's he doing in the cassock? I've never seen a priest like that before. And then he starts saying some prayers in Latin, and he sprinkles holy water, and he does the anointing, and they say, we want to go to your church. So many cases like that. And now, it still happens. But less and less and less and less. There are still priests that go out and do these things. But the increase of the priests that won't is legion. They won't say the Mass. They won't hear confessions after Mass. I used to hear confessions after Mass every single Sunday in Fort Collins. Now they say they don't want to hear confessions after Mass because the priest is tired. There's so many things. There are times, of course, when you can't do that. But it's just that not all the time. The diminishing of the holiness is there. And they see the priests. Many faithful are telling me, we know that there is a house for the priests, a party. Everybody knows a priest needs a break. But do they need party houses? Do they need their special R&R houses? Do they need their special, too mumuch time in these kinds of things? Massive hunting trips and massive motorcycle trips and massive, so that these things happen from time to time. People understand. We know the priests are human and they need a break too. But do they need a break every day? Do they need a break every week? Do they need a break all the time? Are they always tired? One young lady told me, says, Father, I see the older priests. He says Mass at 6 in the morning, but the young priest won't because he's tired. But the old priest of the society, he's not tired. The young priest is tired. Why is that? I'm hearing these things all over the world. Holiness diminishing. Now it comes down to the faith. The last thing to go is the faith. And the faith went. Lest there be any confusion, the faith went. And that's the part that matters. Because holiness, Catholicity, and apostolicity, there's always been weak priests in the church. There's always been a lack of apostolicity, a lack of Catholicity, a lack of holiness, all throughout the history of the church. Judas was a scandal of the priesthood. And there's always been scandals in the priesthood. Not only gravely scandalous priests, but just priests that are weak. Always, 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 you will find a certain weakness in the church of apostolicity, a certain weakness in Catholicity, a certain weakness in holiness. That's human nature. And in fact, in my own case, seeing these kind of things, I saw all these things we talked about over the last 20 years, especially the last 10 years, but I always thought it was just normal human weakness. But only recently, in the course of the last year, has it become clear that there's an organization behind this, that there's a plan behind it, and that weakness only explains part of the problem. It does explain part of it, but not all of it. Just speaking to a priest yesterday, he said he hasn't read the doctrinal preamble. How can you be a priest in the Society of St. Pius X, and you know that there's a liberal document that's come out from your superior, and you don't read it, you don't study it, at least to justify it against the people that are attacking it, but yet the priests are not interested. They're not worried about it. Or they are worried and they don't want to see. I think many priests today in the society are like the man who thinks he has cancer. When you have cancer, you know that if you go to the doctor when you're in stage 1, they can remove the cancer like that. No problem. But if you go to the doctor when you're in stage 4, he just says, fill out your will, you're going to be dead in a month. So the longer that you wait, the worse it is. We all know that. But there's still many hundreds of thousands of men, lakhs and lakhs of men, who have cancer, or they think they have cancer, but they refuse to go to the doctor, because then they're going to find out they have cancer. And if they don't find out they have cancer, they feel better. If they find out they have cancer, they feel terrible. But that's what's happening in society today. There are many priests who don't want to go to the doctor. We're men of doctrine. What's the doctor? The doctrine. Read the doctrine. We find in 2012 a public profession of another faith than the one that we received in 1970 when Archbishop Lefebvre started the society, the same faith that we received 2,000 years ago when the church was founded. And the sacrifice, the sacraments, all of these things, we're truly under the Holy Father, all these things were clear in the society before, now they're confused. Now we have the doctrinal preamble, just very quickly. The loss of the unity in the Society of St. Pius X. Number 7. The doctrinal preamble was written April the 15th, 2012, was sent by Bishop Flay to Rome as a doctrinal statement of what we believe, what we declare, what we accept about Vatican II and the Council. It just happens to be different than what we believe and what we declare over the last 40 years. Therefore, we've got a serious problem. We go straight to number 7, the easiest one to start with. And that is, we declare that we recognize the validity of the sacrifice of the Mass and the sacraments celebrated with the intention to do what the Church does according to the rites indicated in the typical editions of the Roman Missal and the sacramentary rituals legitimately promulgated by Popes Paul VI and John Paul II. So this is the statement that the new Mass, according to Bishop Flay, is valid, which we have accepted before, and legitimately promulgated, and that's the key. Legitimately promulgated means it's a legitimate Mass. Like the example we used last Sunday, we've used many times. It's like someone saying, you get in an accident and Mr. Jones is killed, driven over by your car. So you make a statement to the police. One statement is, I got in my car, I drove down the road, and I drove over Mr. Jones, who was sleeping in the middle of the road, and killed him. Statement B, I got in my car, I drove down the road, and I intentionally killed Mr. Jones. What's the difference? One word, intentionally. What's the big deal? Statement 1, insurance rates go up. Statement 2, you get the electric chair. That's the difference. The first one is called car accident, causing your insurance rates to go up. The second one is called murder, which means you are electrocuted or hung by the neck until dead. There's a big difference between killed Mr. Jones in your car and intentionally killed Mr. Jones in your car. So likewise, there is an essential difference between saying the new Mass is valid, which was promulgated by Pope Paul VI, and saying the new Mass is valid and legitimately promulgated by Pope Paul VI. This means that the new Mass is good. If the new Mass is good, then we have no right to tell people not to go to it. And yet we know, we've always said that. I talked to a priest yesterday and said, do you accept the new directions of society? He says, I think it's the same as it always was. Well, I said, well, the new society says in the doctrinal preamble that the new Mass is not only valid, but legitimate. Do you accept, Father, that the new Mass is valid and legitimate? He says, I accept it's valid, but I do not accept that it's legitimate. It is an illegitimate Mass. Correct. Very good. Then you are against the new position of the Society of St. Pius X. And he said, I don't know. I haven't read it yet. I haven't read it yet. Now, you have to read it. I said, well, it's come out in the March Coronum. They said, well, yeah, that may be true. I understood that, but it's not. I haven't received it yet, so I haven't read it yet. But it is available on the internet. It's very clearly there. And Father Touvenot admits that it's a correct document. We're dealing with doctrine. It used to be in the past, if there was a doctrinal attack against a society, attacking our faith and our stance of faith, we would answer it. And we would answer it with clarity. The new society is muddled in its faith. The new society is collapsed in its faith. And know this, it can't collapse in the faith unless it first loses some holiness, and some Catholicity, and some apostolicity. And if we look down the last 20 years, we will see the steps, which are the steps of corruption. But then there's another side of this whole battle. And that is, it's not just corruption. There is an organized group that has tried to change the official stance of the Society of St. Pius X so that it can be brought in under the modernist Rome in the name of ecumenism. A group that organized itself for that purpose is called GREC, G-R-E-C. Began in 1997 in Paris. They gathered together some theologians and experts from the Roman side, modernists, and Father Laurence, and some other priests, Father Salier, Society of St. Pius X priest, with the approval of Bishop Follet. And those three names are still the key three names in this battle. And they gathered together to say, we need to change the whole battlefield. What can we do to reunite Rome and the Society of St. Pius X? That is, modernist Rome and the Society of St. Pius X. Well, they're at odds with each other. We need to do two things. One, we need to make some alterations on the Roman side. Two, we need to make some alterations on the SSPX side. This is the plan, organization, not just corruption. And therefore, on the Roman side, what are we going to do? We're going to get Rome to free up the Latin Mass better than it did with the 84 and 88 indults. Number two, we're going to get Rome to have a show of goodwill by lifting the excommunications of 1988. Then, on the society side, we're just going to get them to